Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the Westport Library. I'm Gately Ross. This is Johanna Martell. We are the co-directors of Sustainable Westport. We are thrilled to partner with the Westport Library to bring you this exciting event tonight. Our mission at Sustainable Westport is to support, inspire, and connect residents, organizations, and the town of Westport in making both small changes and big commitments towards a healthier, more sustainable future. We are a fully independent nonprofit here in Westport, where we're lucky to be joined by many like-minded organizations doing great work. This spring, we launched Your Yard, Our Climate, a community-wide collaborative initiative created to empower individuals to take meaningful action and highlight the power each of us holds in the spaces we can control, our own yards. Rather than working in isolation, we saw an opportunity to connect and collaborate with the many incredible groups in our town. By joining forces with other local organizations, we aimed to coordinate our environmental, conservation, and climate-related efforts, amplifying our impact and extending our reach throughout the community. When many people take small, intentional steps, these efforts add up, transforming not just our personal landscapes, but contributing to a healthier, more resilient climate. These simple actions strengthen our shared sense of purpose and help us create lasting change for both our environment and for our community. The coalition delivered over 16 events in the course of 3 months to help transform personal outdoor spaces.
So tonight's program was made possible through the generous support of Black Rock Garden Structures, and we'd like to thank Andrew Tyrell, the founder and owner of Black Rock Garden Structures, for sponsoring this event and being here with us tonight. Andrew designs and builds custom garden structures to perfectly suit his client's site, garden needs, and budget. Please stop by his table in the back to learn more. We are so pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Joe Lampel. Joe is a longtime advocate for organic gardening and ecological stewardship. He is the creator and host of the Joe Gardener Show podcast and founder of joegardener.com and the Joe Gardener Online Gardening Academy. He's also the creator, host, and executive producer of the Emmy-winning national public television series, Growing a Greener World, now available on YouTube. Joe has shared his expertise as the host of Fresh from the Garden on DIY Network and as an on-air contributor for the Today Show, Good Morning America, and the Weather Channel. His work has earned numerous accolades, including the American Horticultural Society's B.Y. Morrison Communication Award for outstanding and inspirational garden education across multiple platforms. Joe's latest book, The Vegetable Gardening Book, offers a practical, comprehensive guide to growing food successfully. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned gardener, it is available for purchase tonight, and Joe will be signing copies after his presentation. When he's not talking or writing about gardening and living green, Joe can likely be found in and around his organic garden and spending time with his family on their farm outside Atlanta, Georgia. We are so excited to have Joe Lampel with us tonight. Please welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Gately. I've had a great day. I got here this morning, never been to Westport. I've been all around here, but just never here. And when I was contacted by Gretchen, one of the team members of this great organization, months ago now, to inquire if I was available and if I would be interested in coming up, I learned a little bit about what you all are doing. And I had never heard of anything quite so in the moment of really being relevant to what we need to know. In my work, I pride myself in really trying to be in the know on what's going on around the country. And I talked to a lot of towns and organizations and people that are like-minded in their interest to learn to garden more ecologically or sustainably or whatever you want to call it. But I was really intrigued by the invitation and what was happening here. So I jumped on the opportunity, the invitation to come, and I've learned so much, and I am really pleased to be able to be here in front of you tonight to share some of what I think we all need to be really focusing on going forward as gardeners and as weekend warriors too. So what we're going to talk about today is a blueprint for ecological gardening and 10 steps that we can take for success. And along the way, I'm going to plant the seed on some things that we need to know before we get to those 10 steps. Before we do, I just want to give a shout out because I was talking about Sustainable Westport's efforts and what they're doing to reach community and business and residential homeowners and your local government. And the resources that are already there, like the website, as I was preparing for this, I was so impressed with the information that's available to you right now to get started. You know, a lot of times when we're intrigued by an idea and we might want to participate or at least learn more, we're stymied on where we even go to start. Where do we start? How do we get some information like that? And they have done a phenomenal job. And I've seen a lot of websites on trying to do the same thing, but to help you right where you are, meet you right where you are and get you to the next step. And then from there, an opportunity to go further if you choose to, but it's very impressive, not only with the online information, but the face-to-face and
Hi,
all
I'm
the programs
Siri.
too.
How can I help you?
Siri, we're not talking to you right now. That happens from time to time, but I've never heard that voice in that dialect before. Okay, anyway, so thank you for doing that, for the incredible work that you've put out already. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't checked out the website, it is truly a treasure trove of information. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today as we talk through our time together. The evolution of how we've gardened in the past, because it's very different than where we are today, and where we need to be right now, or at least tomorrow, is different than how we're gardening today. But I think in context of the evolution of where we've been and where we are today is going to be very relevant to what we're talking about. And then where we need to get to. That's really going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. But why now? What's the sense of urgency? Because I think that's really going to help paint a picture of the incumbency on many of us to do something, anything. But it's the collective efforts that are really going to matter. And the best part is I'm going to give you 10 very doable steps to help you make a difference right where you are, no matter where you are. So I don't know about you, but meadows and prairies have become very popular in conversation in the past few years for good reason, because they were a really prominent source across North America for centuries. And over time, we've lost them to various reasons, but they're critical in all that they offer. Yes, they're pretty, especially when they're in bloom, but a healthy meadow has blooms not just in the summertime, but throughout the season. And whether this is a vast expanse or maybe it's a mini meadow in your yard, they are ecological islands. They do so much that we don't even think about. Beyond just the beauty for us, they provide habitat and nesting sites and shelter for wildlife and biodiversity, and they improve the soil as the organic material breaks down. And so they're nice. But meadows maybe aren't for everybody, but it is something that we're hearing a lot more about, and it's very much a part of ecological gardening. So how did we get here? What's the background to where we're having discussions on ecological gardening? Well, in the past, all we really asked of our gardens for years was that they be pretty. Nothing else. We never really thought about the unintended consequences of our actions to make them so. In fact, I often say, as gardeners and weekend warriors, we create a lot of pretty spaces. But in the process of doing that, we do a lot of not so pretty things to make them so. So the pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides, the unintended consequences, the collateral damage, the ripple effects of the need to have something pretty at all cost. And in my profession for years, one of the most common questions I would get as a horticulturalist and somebody in the public eye who was the one that people often came to for answers to questions was, what can I spray on that bug to kill it? And fortunately, that question doesn't come up nearly as much as it used to. But I have a question for you related to their question, and that is, of all the bugs in the world, anybody want to take a guess at what percentage are actually bad bugs or ones that would do damage to our plants? What percentage? Are you a gardener? You nailed the answer. It's 1%. Thank you. And I'm encouraged that you said that. A lot of times I get answers that are much higher than that percentage-wise. But here's the thing. If only 1% of the insects in our garden and landscapes and beyond are ones that can do damage, if you do the math on that, and it's not hard, 99% are either beneficial or neutral, and they're not doing any harm. So why would we use something to spray on a bug we haven't even identified yet as friend or foe, and usually it's a friend, that's non-selective, and it's gonna kill anything it comes in contact with? So I think all of our roles right now is to do more to educate ourselves and then others when those kind of questions come up. So I think I've already gotten off track, but that's happened sometimes. But after that time period, and as we started to evolve in the mid-40s when World War II was wrapping up and we had all these chemicals from all the bomb making and things, they had to decide, somebody was deciding, well, what do we do with all these chemicals now? We need to find another purpose for them. So a lot of it went into fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, and a lot of people were using them. But thankfully, the Rodells, J.I. Rodale, the founder of the Rodale Institute in the mid-40s, and the Rodale Institute family, since then, they were really the North America, the U.S. pioneers of organic gardening when the term really started to become more commonly referenced. And so with organic gardening, we avoid the use of synthetic chemicals, and instead we focus on building soil. And that was really catching on, and there were a lot of comparisons or trials of synthetic chemicals to organics, and they were finding that there was really incredible success with organics. So people were focusing more on soil building at that point, which is very important and a very good thing. And then in the 50s, this concept of IPM, the master gardeners will know what I'm talking about here. It's integrated pest management. Who here is familiar with that term and what it's about? Yeah. For those that don't know, integrated pest management, and a little bit later I'll go through the 5 steps or so, but essentially it's a roadmap or a blueprint on how to deal with pest challenges. And by the way, when many of us use the word pest, we associate that with insects or bugs, bad bugs. But pest is more of a generic term that applies to anything that's doing harm. So that includes the weeds, that includes the diseases and insects as well, and among other things too. So technically, insecticides would be the thing typically that most gardeners are looking to manage the control of through IPM, integrated pest management. But the point is, they start you out on a plan from the most benign method of control, and then you advance up as you need to ultimately, when you get to the last step, it's kind of like the nuclear option. You know, it's like the thing you gotta do to really wipe it out if that's what you have to do. But it gives you organized steps along the way. And that's the best thing we've got or have had up until now with ecological gardening, which I'm gonna share with you next. It's a good program and it still works, but it's not comprehensive enough because it's not just about having our gardens look pretty anymore. It's what our gardens need to do beyond just that. And integrated pest management stops short of all of those things. But after that, we got into sustainable gardening. Probably about 15 years ago, that term, sustainable gardening, became very popular. So much so that it kind of got overused. And people really, it just didn't have the impact that it had once it got worn out as far as the use of the term. But it still is very valid in how we garden sustainably, in that the focus of that is to really concentrate on the use of our vital resources, our precious resources, such as watching the amount of water that we use to minimize that, being mindful of the inputs that we're putting into our soil and on our plants, such as chemicals, or reducing the things that we were buying to put into our garden, or the packaging that those things came in. So it was more about stewardship of how we gardened, and it made a lot of sense. And again, those issues are still valid. Most recently, just prior to ecological gardening, have you heard of the term regenerative and the use for gardening, farming, horticulture, landscaping? The root word regenerative is really being inserted a lot right now. And the idea, unlike sustainable, when you contrast it to that, sustainable is trying to maintain a current condition, where regenerative, in the case of this context right here, the main goal is to reverse the forces of climate change, primarily with a release of carbon. And that's as technical as I'm going to get here, but you just need to understand that it's a very popular movement around the world right now because it focuses on minimizing soil disturbance, because soil, if you don't know this, is a great aggregator of carbon, and it holds it until it's disturbed through tillage or turning over. So to the extent that we can minimize that through no dig or no till via regenerative fill in the blank, that's what that's about. And we're hopefully reducing the amount of carbon being released into the atmosphere. But now, what we're going to talk about tonight is ecological gardening. And it's a concept that is so new that there really isn't some standard definition yet when you look, at least the last time I checked, that really defines what it is. But you saw me put this term up, or this quote up, just a minute ago, and it's really only half the quote. But it's worth repeating because I want to show you the other part of it. And that is, in the past, all we asked of our gardens is that they be pretty. But the other part of it is, according to Doug Tallamy, we all know Dr. Tallamy, now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. They really do. And it's up to us to help make that happen. So when I was trying to explain what ecological gardening is, I kind of came up with my own definition from the research I had found and from my belief in what it stands for in the fewest possible words I could come up with. So this is the short version of what I believe ecological gardening can be described as. And that is the practice of creating and promoting healthy, biodiverse ecosystems in a way that benefits not only us, but the key thing is, moreover, all other life. Because it's a system. When we garden or we work in our landscapes each weekend or whenever, it's not just about that small area that's under our watch. It's about a bigger picture. It's about a system because everything really is interconnected. So I want to help you understand that in the context of ecological gardening today. So much to do, why now? So let's talk about this sense of urgency and what's happening out there that we may or may not be aware of. First of all, for those of you who are old enough, yeah, I see some heads nodding, on those summer road trips with your family. Dad's typically the one driving. He wasn't my family. We'd make the road trip from Miami, Florida, up to the Smoky Mountains. And there's this turnpike. If you've ever driven down to Florida, there's this long, boring road. And we would have to pull over every hour or so because Dad would have to pull into the gas station and wipe off all the bugs. Yeah, because we couldn't see anymore. But now let me ask you this question. When was the last time you had to do that? When was the last time you saw a windshield full of bugs? I can't remember any. It's been forever. So just hang on to that thought for a second. Another example, monarch butterflies. There was a time where in Atlanta, I would see, as many as probably anybody, and I marveled every time I saw them. They would stop me in my track. As you know, they're beautiful and majestic, and you just can't help but love them. But it wasn't until years later that I stopped to think about the fact that, I've been planting a lot of milkweed in my gardens and landscapes, and in the 13, this is true, I've been in my farm for a little over 13 years, and I think I've seen 10 monarchs in total over those 13-year periods. It's been decades since I've seen this. And it's a sad state of affairs. The best way to describe what's happening here with the bugs on the windshield, the monarchs, in birds, wildlife. It's not. It's the losses we notice. For example, my reference to years ago, I saw all those monarchs, and now I'm starting to realize, wow, I only see them once in a while. So I'm recognizing the losses over 2 points in time. But what we don't recognize year to year is the diminishment. The incremental changes year to year are significant, but not significant enough that we're really noticing one year to the next as far as the decline. Hi. Yes. Yep. Her family was involved in Monarch Watch, which is a great organization that tracks monarch activity. And we're gonna have a time for a Q&A at the end of this talk, but it's a good point. You were tracking the same thing. Where'd you go? There you are, yeah, thank you. Monarch populations have dropped 92% in the last 20 years, and it's not getting any better. They all migrate down to a small spot in Mexico that's getting smaller each year, plus climate change, habitat loss, and pesticides. So I will be using those three things quite a bit today, those three terms together, so get used to it. Sad but true. Okay, here's another one. 45% loss of arthropods in the last 35 years. What does that mean? What are arthropods, first of all, and why does that matter? Arthropods, let me put it this way, 84% of all the wildlife identified on this planet are arthropods. Most of those are insects. In the food chain, insects are pretty low on the chain, but they support everything above it. And if we're losing almost half of arthropods in 35 years, and most of those arthropods are insects, that's scary. So what are arthropods besides insects? They are millipedes, centipedes, mites, spiders, and crabs and lobsters. The common denominator they share is a jointed skeleton on the outside of their body, known as an exoskeleton. So if you want to share that with friends at your next party, that's what an arthropod is. But the scary thing is that we're losing a vast amount of insects, and they are the largest species of wildlife on the planet. Not good. 3 billion birds have been lost in the past 50 years. And it's worse than that, but 3 billion is bad enough. 2/3 of the Earth's wildlife is gone. Let's just simplify this to some bad news. 2/3 is gone. Why is that? Habitat loss. I told you I'm going to say these words a lot. Habitat loss has been relentless, and it's happening at a point that there isn't any opportunity for this wildlife to manage it, to adapt, to evolve with the rapid change in habitat loss. Climate change, we know about that, but pesticide use is the other big one. Insecticide use is the correct technical term for this. But we still are dealing with challenges such as mosquitoes, and I'm just gonna bring this up as a specific example because I'll inform somebody that doesn't realize this tonight. But the fogging companies, I get that mosquitoes are a nuisance and they're painful and all of that, and there are ways to deal with them effectively that aren't as destructive as what these fogging companies are. And although they are often promoted as natural and organic or eco-friendly, the truth is they're using a product that's a synthetic version of pyrethrin. Pyrethrin is from the chrysanthemum daisy, so it's natural and organic. But so is ricin and snake venom, and you don't want that anywhere near you. It's deadly. And these companies will come out and they'll fog, and it statistically is only killing about 10 to 50% of the mosquitoes, but because it's non-selective, broad spectrum, meaning these chemicals cannot identify between a beneficial and a mosquito. There's nothing in existence that can only target a mosquito. Even though some of these companies advertise as such, that's not the case. So the bottom line is when we're doing what we think is a good thing. In good faith, we're hiring these companies because they've promoted themselves as natural and organic or eco-friendly, and then we're trying to do the right thing. But at the same time, that's really not the case. And so it's not only killing all the insects in your property, but your neighbors too, because it's that effective in a bad way. So just food for thought. So our friend Doug Tallamy, why now? Let's get to that. This is a little more information on what he's saying about this. We're now at a critical point of losing so many species from local ecosystems that their ability to produce the oxygen, clean water, flood control, pollination, pest control, carbon storage, et cetera, that is, the ecosystem services that sustain us will become seriously compromised. It's heavy duty stuff, but we can make a difference and we can have some impact on this. So I'm going to walk you through briefly those steps of integrated pest management to set the foundation for the 10 steps of ecological gardening that build on this. And remember what I said, this is good, but it's very limited for what we need to do today. It's the best thing we had, but I'm proposing something much better. So in integrated pest management, there are 5 basic steps, and the first one is very important. It goes back to that reference I made a minute ago when somebody said, what can I spray on this plant to kill that bug, when they didn't even know what the bug was. The first thing we need to do is identify what that bug or insect is. Is it a friend or a foe? So I ask you, in this picture, can you tell me what either of these are? A lantern? It's not a lanternfly. Good guess. I mean, they're both very attractive, but that's actually a squash vine borer. And I can't actually hear everybody, so I'm sure many of you got it right. But the one on the right is a squash vine borer. Who grows squash? Do you get squash vine borer up here? Yeah. It's enemy number 1 for cucurbit growers. It'll devastate your plant overnight, and they're really hard to control at all phases. But that's the parent that lays the eggs on the leaves that then turns into a worm that goes into the hollow stem and takes out your plant. It's a very hated insect. It's a foe. What's this other one over here? Yes. Thank you very much. Ladybug larva. So that's the early stages of a ladybug. A lot of people don't know that until somebody points it out. And I know many of my colleagues who used to think that was a pest and they'd kill it just by association, it looks scary. But they evolve into the ladybug or the lady beetle. And ironically, it's at this stage that they're most active in eating aphids and other pest insects. So getting to know what it is before you give it a guilty verdict is very, very important. And again, I'm gonna remind you, 99% of the bugs you come encounter with are beneficial or neutral. Okay, one more test. Okay, the one on the, what's that? The left? Left. Left? Left. What is that one? Ladybug, right, okay. That's the adult of what you just saw a minute ago. What's this one? Bean beetle. They're cousins, but they're very different. The bean beetle is very destructive. If you're growing bean plants, it's gonna decimate your leaves if it's there. And they're very prolific. They're out there in force at all life stages at one time. So getting to know them and deciding who's who before you decide their fate is very important. And then number 2, step 2, monitor the pest activity. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Is it staying the same? And how are your plants responding to it? Those are aphids, and aphids will suck the juice out of many plants, but at the same time, there's a lot of predators that love aphids, such as the lady beetle and lacewings and others. So if you're tolerant, and this is the amazing thing about how nature works, is that there are forces that exist that will come in and do this cleanup work for you if you're patient enough. And that's one of the hard things with us as humans oftentimes. We're not patient enough, but if we were, we might have that problem solved naturally. And then determine your action threshold. How much is too much damage before you feel personally the need to come in there and do some action? So these are potato beetles on potato leaves, and they are eating them, and that's what their favorite food is. But you can deal with about 35% loss to your foliage before you really suffer any sort of gross setback. Plants can photosynthesize enough to keep on going. And so if you're not growing a lot of potatoes, you could get out there in the early morning when they're very quiet and sleeping still, and you can tap them into a cup of soapy water, and that's the end of them. But it's an easy solution. So just understand what your threshold is before you take action. And then what are those action opportunities? For example, if you have snails or slugs, are they a problem up here? Yes, okay. So you want to know what's the most benign way that you can deal with that problem specifically. And wouldn't you know it, beer is very effective. And the best news for me, because I have to deal with this too, it doesn't need to be fancy beer. It can be cheap beer. You don't need a good IPA. So you pour beer into a bowl or something, put it in at surface level in the evening, right before you wrap up the day. And then in the morning you come out, you usually have a bunch of drowned slugs or snails in the bottom. Kind of gross, but if that's what your goal is, it's very effective. So there are ways that you can manage your insect pest problems in a fairly targeted way that is on the benign side in the spectrum of what you're dealing with. Physical inspection, different things that you can do, protective barriers like the floating row cover in the middle, and then diatomaceous earth, which is just basically fossilized diatoms that are thousands of years old, which are powder-like, and they're like shards of glass to snails and slugs and other soft-bodied insects. So when they crawl over that, they're being cut and they dry out and they die. But if you don't breathe it, that's one thing you need to be careful about. It's very effective for those types of insects. So understanding how insects respond to various controls is very important in what you decide to use for that specific insect or pest. Okay, what am I doing? Maybe. Thank you. Don't go. Okay, keep talking, keep talking. Okay. This middle one is an underutilized resource, the floating row cover. That, for like the squash vine board that you all hate, like I do, if you can put something like that netting over your squash plant before they arrive, which is early summer, she'll never get a chance to land on your plants to lay the eggs. So that's a very effective one. For the cabbage white butterfly, when you're growing your cool season crops, your broccoli and your cabbage and so forth, that is the best deterrent that you can do. Side note, I have some fellow compost lovers in the room, and it reminded me of a story that happened to me one time when I was speaking, and I think it would be appropriate to tell. So you or somebody needs to remind me to tell that story at the end. Okay. All right. Does it go backwards? Doesn't go anywhere. Do you have a backup? Because I have a backup if you don't. Or I can do that. Good? Good. Oh, wow. What happened over there? Okay, great. All right, so let's move on. And then evaluate your results. So as you're inspecting, which is very important, those guys, that picture of those two guys were looking under the leaves. If you have insect damage on your leaves, look under the leaves. They're not dumb. They know that that's where they need to hide to get away from the predators, because most of the predators are, like humans, are looking on top, but they're not looking underneath. And that's where many of those caterpillars and other insect pests do their damage. Okay, so let's get into ecological gardening steps beyond IPM. So IPM stands for what? Excellent, thank you. Okay, so now I'm gonna up the ante a little bit with a few more letters I'm gonna squeeze in there. So IPM is great, but it's a little bit dated. It's time for an update. So we're gonna say goodbye to IPM, and we're gonna do this. So just a few more letters, but we're all friends here, so we can do this. But what does all of that stuff stand for? I have to look at it again, and I don't know if I can remember. Bear with me and give me a little bit grace, but I'm gonna try. But these other things that I've added in here are the components to ecological gardening that we really need to focus on going forward. And then we'll give you the 10 steps. All right, so I've got integrated pest, disease, weeds, soil, mulch, ecological footprint, chemicals, weeds, natives, invasives, lawns, biodiverse habitat management. A little pressure there. But yes, those are the things that, beyond just creating gardens that are pretty, we need to do these other things too. But it's not that hard. It's gonna be pretty easy. So we're also gonna dumb that down, take out all those letters, and just call it ecological gardening, okay? So we'll just stick to that. And remember ecological gardening. So let's talk about 10 of numerous steps that we could do to practice it. Okay, number one, promote soil health. And sometimes I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but for many of you who could use some additional information on the value of healthy soil, it is everything to plant health in a healthy ecosystem. When you focus on, I sometimes say this, if you had $1 to spend on your garden, put 90 cents into the soil and 10 cents into the plant. Because when you have healthy soil through the addition of compost, which is a brief commercial on compost, it's the single best soil ingredient you can add to any garden soil to make it better. So whether your soil is heavy, like clay soil. What's your soil like here? It's not heavy, is it? Sandy more, right? Because you're right on the water. In Georgia, we're famous for Georgia red clay, which is very heavy. It's not bad soil, but it's heavy, and you need to lighten it up so it drains better. Compost helps with that. But if you have very loose, sandy soil, compost helps retain moisture too. It's amazing how one soil can fix both problems, but it does. In addition to that, it's so full of microorganisms that are what's actually converted into organic nutrients that the plants take up to feed themselves as needed with healthy organic nutrients. And there's a whole living food web network underground that's doing all that work when we focus on building the soil, like with the addition of organic matter such as compost. So if you can focus on your soil, you can have the healthiest garden you've ever had without using pesticides or herbicides or other chemicals. You can have the most productive garden you've ever had, and you will have a lot more fun in your garden because you won't be working as hard. And that's just the thumbnail version of, there are college degrees on soil. There's a lot to talk about with soil. But if you can just learn the basics of soil health, you will go a long way with your ecological gardening practice. And that's one thing, just one thing that you can do. Secondly, you can add mulch on top, and we're going to talk about the benefits of mulch in just 1 second. But mulch is just a covering over the soil surface of some organic material, whether that's wood chips or straw or hay or grass clippings or living mulch, such as the top half of this picture, that's a ground cover. But in the case of the living mulch or the mulch, this is arborist wood chips, this is free wood chips. Around the country, there are services or arborists that you may know that once they cut down a tree and they grind it up, they need to get rid of the chips. And a lot of times they're happy to give it to you. If you just tell them a safe place to dump it, you've got the mulch for free. And I do this many times a year at my property, and it's fantastic. But it has many benefits. So in my garden, I use it in my pathways, and I use it in my raised beds. I use wood mulch for that. That's not arborist wood chips. That's hardwood mulch, natural hardwood mulch that I buy just because of the consistency and the look. It's not quite as irregular as you would get from arborist wood chips. So it's an aesthetic thing I need for the TV and stuff, but it does the same thing. But in my garden, in the pathways, the main purpose of it is to cut down on weeds. And as you're gonna learn in a second, one of the biggest benefits of mulch is that it blocks the sunlight hitting the soil surface. And when you can block the sunlight, many weeds require sunlight to germinate. And if they don't get it, they don't germinate. So if you want to make your weeding life easier, mulch your pathways and then find a mulch, whatever mulch you choose, and there's lots of options, into your beds is a way to, one, cut down on your weeds, but many other things as well. So what are the benefits? Let me come over here and I know you can see it, but I'm going to read them too. So first of all, it protects the soil surface. You have probably, on a hot day like this, if we have more of these days and we have exposed soil without rain, it's going to become like, well, you have sandy soil. I will speak for many of us have hard clay soil. It becomes like concrete. literally as hard as concrete. So when water hits it, it runs off. It does not go down into the soil. So mulch is acting as a protective barrier to kind of keep the area under it moist, so it doesn't harden off like concrete. So if that's you, it does that. It improves water infiltration, because when rain or your irrigation system is hitting your soil, if you have a mulch layer on top, it's like a coffee filter, a drip coffee filter system dripping the coffee, slowly perking it into your cup. Slow, but it comes out and it's just a nice even flow, and it allows it to come through the filter of the coffee filter. So the soil acts like that. Reduces soil compaction. Here's an analogy for you. Compacted soil is tough for water to get into, for air to get into, and for roots to expand. So you really want to avoid compacted soil. But if you don't add a protective layer over the surface, raindrops are landing on soil are the equivalent of a hammer striking a nail over time. It's just the constant beating of the raindrops onto the soil surface ends up packing in those little soil granules, ultimately to the point that it's really tough for inches down. So you want to avoid that. So it does that. Whoops, my bad. Reduces soil-borne diseases. If you're a vegetable gardener, especially a tomato grower, at least where I live in high humidity and high heat, diseases are very prevalent with a lot of plants, especially tomatoes. And there are many pathogens that live in the soil that affect our plants. And they get onto our plants oftentimes by splashing up onto the leaves, the low-growing leaves. But if you have mulch as a layer between the soil and the leaves, those pathogens aren't able to access the leaves. So you're cutting down on your disease problem with mulch. It suppresses weed germination. I just mentioned that a minute ago. It retains moisture because it reduces the risk of evaporation, because it's just not allowing the soil surface to heat up as much. So it's causing the moisture to stay in the soil longer. It's keeping the soil cooler because it's got a nice cover on top. And in the wintertime, it's keeping the roots warmer through the insulation. It improves the soil health because every mulch that I use is an organic material that's going to break down and improve your soil over time. Except for rubber mulch, which is great in pathways and playgrounds around schools, but not around your garden. You want something natural that breaks down and improves it. So improving the soil health and then reducing runoff, because all water seeks its lowest level, so it's always going to run downhill, but with it, it's going to take whatever's in its way. So if your neighbor's been using some nasty chemical, it's going to pick that up and take it with it. If there's oil spill, whatever it is, it's all going down into our aquifers and our watersheds, which around here is the last thing we want to do. That's not good. And it's aesthetically pleasing. So there's a few reasons to why we should use mulch. I know you've talked about this because I've heard about it. You've done some workshops or information sessions on lightening your environmental footprint as you're working around your yard and your garden. So let's just hit on those one more time, because repetition is good to remind you. First of all, in addition to being a horticulturist, I went, after college, I so wanted to engross myself with other like-minded people. I enrolled in Master Gardener program too. And the thing that we're always talking about, and this is going back 20-something years, I think, is cleaning up, putting your fall garden to bed. So cleaning up the tidy mess, getting the duff layer out from under your plants, cutting back all your perennials that were going to seed, and making everything look tidy so that you wouldn't have as many overwintering pests or diseases that were likely to show up the following spring. Well, we now know that we don't want to be so tidy. There's a lot of benefits to relax your standards a little bit more. And as a neat freak, that's a little hard for me to do, but once you understand why it's important, it makes it so much easier. For example, these perennials, the seed heads, this is gold for birds and other wildlife that needs nesting material or food sources. This is one of their most vital food sources this time of year, especially, are the seeds. And many perennials have hollow stems, and solitary bees need a nesting site, and they drill a little hole into the hollow stems of these perennials, and they lay their eggs, which become our solitary bees in the spring. They hatch from these. But if we're too aggressive in cleaning it up, that doesn't happen. Do you have the Leave the Leaves campaign up here? Have we talked about that up here a lot? In my world, it's talked about all the time in the fall. And here's another time where we are naturally inclined to be very neat and tidy, is to get those leaves up and off our lawn. And understandably so. When you have a thick layer of leaves on your lawn surface, that can be detrimental to your grass. However, we don't need to be quite that tidy, and if it's not a heavy layer, we can just leave them. But what we know now, a la Doug Tallamy and others, is that there's a lot of wildlife that uses those leaves for their overwintering sites, their nesting sites, their shelter, their protection from moths and butterflies to turtles and frogs, and lots of beneficial wildlife that we really want to promote their life and give them a good start as they come out of hibernation in the spring. And the leaves are their source for that. The fireflies, the lightning bugs that are out there, they use these leaves, and it's vital to their livelihood to come and emerge in spring and summer. So for me, I love leaves for my mulch, and I'm very conflicted now because understanding the value of leaves to be left alone and not shredded like I would do for my mulch, which is it's nice mulch, I would go collect my neighbors' leaves from all their yards and the subdivisions around my place. They're required to do it. They don't have a choice. Is there a thing like that here? No? You're on your own? That's nice, because where I live, they have to bag them up and put them at the curb in these paper bags. And so for 3 to 4 Saturdays in November, I had been doing this for years, I'd go pick up all their leaves and put them in my truck, bring them home, and stack them up, and it would be about 400 bags over 3 weekends. And some of them, this is where I don't feel so bad as I used to. I would keep 100 for my leaf shredding. I'd shred 100 bags, but 300 I would release in my native landscape bed. So I'd free the leaves, that's what I would call it, and I would shred 100. So that's, what's the math on that? 75% or so I would release into my yard. So, the other thing that was important for you to know here is all those leaves that were bagged up at the curb were picked up by the trash service, not a recycling facility, and they were thrown away into the landfill. We're gonna talk about that in a minute too, which is ridiculous because this is organic material that's gonna improve your garden or be habitat for wildlife. And here it is required to be bagged up and sent to the landfill. Just electric equipment. I know you've talked about this, just maybe converting from gas-powered stuff. I have all that equipment, all that gas-powered stuff, had all that gas-powered stuff for all the work I was always doing around my place. A few years back, I started converting over, and it was like an oh my gosh changeover. The technology, the power, the ease, the happiness factor when you're not having to haul it to the repair guy every year because you put bad gas in it and it screwed up the carburetor. If I had a penny for every $100 I've spent on that. So yeah, this stuff works really great, and I have it all now. It's just sweet. I hope that you will really give that a consideration next time you need to replace something, because it works phenomenally well, and the ease of use. There's nothing better than just popping a fresh battery in and squeezing the trigger and you're off and running. You're not pulling your shoulder out trying to make the thing start with a cord. Okay, so let's eliminate the use of chemicals too. I'm a firm believer that with a healthy garden, by feeding the soil, you're not gonna have to resort to insecticides or fungicides or herbicides. And I have a really healthy, thriving garden, and I have for years, and I've never used a insecticide in my garden. And I've flipped through a few pictures of my garden. I really didn't stop on them, but it's always very healthy and very productive, and I do everything I can to attract in beneficial insects and let nature take the course on pest management. But along the way, I'm standing over my plants, looking at them, inspecting to see if there's anything I need to pay attention to that I need to be proactively working on to eliminate before it gets out of hand. But we can eliminate the use of chemicals because it's very important that we do that, because pesticide use is a big deal. Insecticide use. When I was doing a podcast a few years back, I interviewed Dr. Stephen Kress of the Audubon Society. And during that conversation, I was simply curious when I asked the following question. I said, Dr. Kress, do you guys have any statistics about how many backyard songbirds die from just the residual impact of eating the insects, because I know insects are a big part of their diet, but what about the ones that they eat that have been sprayed and killed with pesticides? He says, well, as a matter of fact, we did do a study on that, and the number I'm gonna give you, you could add another 0 to, and it would still be probably conservative. So he told me their number that they publicly say is 7 million songbirds a year die from just eating insects that have been poisoned by insecticide. But if you add the other 0 on that, that's 70 million. And he said that number is probably still conservative. So it's the unintended consequences and the residual impact, the ripple effect that we don't think about when we're using these things. Yeah, we're using our pesticides because we see that insect we want to take out and we've identified it as a bad guy and we use something. But we don't understand that 98% of all insecticides we use are non-selective. I mentioned that term before, broad spectrum, and they cannot differentiate between a good insect and a bad one. So they're going to kill everything they come in contact with. I borrowed, I can't say I stole this slide from your website, but it was very relevant. And 40% of your properties around here contain wetlands, so the use of fertilizers and pesticides often end up downstream into the Long Island Sound, impacting water quality in all levels of the ecosystem. So that's just one other thing, and that's another unintended consequences, not, other than the birds, is the runoff that goes into the lowest common denominator, which in your case are all those watersheds. And then conserve and provide water. Now you're close to a lot of water. Yes, I know that. But have you noticed, for those of you who are putting saucers out or bird feeders out, or bird baths or something, how much activity comes to it, whether it's birds or the bees? I certainly have, especially on hot summer days with my bees, all of them here on the right side. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me isolate these each time. As far as water conservation, there's never been a time in history that there hasn't been a severe drought in some part of the world. And it's not a matter of if, but when it's going to happen, or you're going to have water restrictions. In Atlanta, we were 4 days away from a total drought because the big lake above us, Lake Lanier, was going to dry up. And it was 4 days away from drying up to the point that anybody in Atlanta didn't have access to water. But we got the rain just in time, and it helped. But drip irrigation is a very smart way to not only micro-irrigate and get the water right where you need it, but only where you need it, so you're not watering the weeds too, and you're being very water conscious with how much you're using. And you know exactly how much water is coming out, because these little tips at the ends of these emitters deliver an exact amount of water over a specific period of time. Like this one is 2 gallons per hour. So if you ran that for an hour, you get 2 gallons of water underneath that. And with capillary action in your soil, even though it's landing in a specific point, the capillary action is pulling that water horizontally. So gravity is going to take it down, and the capillary action is going to pull it out. So you don't need a lot of these to cover a good amount of ground, but it's a very efficient way to water. And then I showed this in the sustainability picture. Soaker hoses and drip irrigation timers are a fantastic way to put your watering on autopilot. So when you're going on vacation this summer, and you want to not worry about your watering, if you get a battery-operated timer for $30, and you put a soaker hose that basically oozes out water along the entire length of the hose, you can put your watering concerns at ease while you're gone. But it's really made a big difference when I've needed to go out of town and I'm worried about my watering. That's a tiny little bird feeder right outside my office, a bird bath. It's maybe that big around. And to see 4 blue jays, yeah, sitting around holding court at that water feature is just a real joy. And lots of birds come to water and other wildlife. And we take it for granted that we just assume they have access to fresh water. But a lot of times they don't. And you're reminded of that when you set something out. It's a simple little step that we can take that makes a big difference for that wildlife. So give that a thought. And if you do, put in a rescue opportunity, because like bees will get in and they get waterlogged and they can't get out. And other, little creatures will get in there. And wine corks are pretty handy for that. The leftover wine corks, if anybody needs a tip. But that works. And then, your frogs and your toads, they just love the water, and I love the sound of them. And I always notice it's when the rains come or I've opened up a water feature and all of a sudden I hear their sounds, and it's just wonderful. Okay, We're getting close to the end here. So the first one, these are maybe two of the most important things that we can do for ecological gardening. And that is, of course, grow native plants for year-round support. And I know that, no doubt you've heard a lot about native plants, but native plants are the ones that are from here. They've evolved with wildlife. Wildlife is oftentimes dependent on specific native plants. They're plant specific. They're specialists. They need a certain flower type or a certain flower form. And the classic example is the milkweed with the monarch butterflies. The adult monarchs lay their eggs on the milkweed, and when the eggs hatch, the little caterpillars have to eat milkweed leaves in order to survive. So they're specialists. So these native plants are critical for a lot of reasons, but that the wildlife and the native plants co-evolved and they need each other to continue. So there are a lot of resources for figuring out what native plants you can have access to that do well around here, so we won't get into that tonight. But more importantly, I think we need to talk about the invasive issues, because you can't really have a good stand of native plants if you have invasive taking over that space. So we need to remove those invasives because they're so aggressive, they're gonna just prevent an opportunity for native plants to survive. So what makes a plant invasive? And I'm gonna have to read these along with you because, first of all, they're adaptable. They can establish and survive in a range of climates and a variety of habitats, no matter what the soil quality and no matter what the level of light in many cases. They've just got some sort of superpowers that make them not so picky on what kind of environment they need to grow. And then they're fast growing and fast spreading, usually capable of reproducing in multiple ways. And they're prolific seeders, and their seeds have a high viability rate. Everything you don't want them to be, this is them, these native plants, these thugs, these invasive plants, really. I should, not all native, oh, I said native plants. I meant non-natives. If you heard me say native in a derogatory, that was a mistake. Non-native invasives, that's the ones we're talking about here, just for the record. End of show. Whoops. Okay. And then they're quick to fill open areas, and this is a big one. And often the first plants to begin growing in a place that's been recently disturbed. This is how they fill in, and then they keep going. They're very opportunistic, so they look for a spot, they take over, and they just don't stop. And then once established, native plants can prevent or inhibit the return of native plants for that reason. Whoops, what'd I do? Thank you. There? One back? Oh, okay. Do I go backwards or forwards? Oh, read the last one. Oh, typo. Embarrassing, but thanks. See, you all are, I'm just happy that you all aren't asleep. You're really paying attention here. This is great. Thank you. Ooh, that's a very bad typo. Whew, okay. I was trying to figure out what y'all were saying. It's like I just couldn't get it. Okay, I got it. Okay. Here's some other facts about invasives. They're responsible for approximately 60% of worldwide extinction among plants and animals. That's how aggressive they are. They impose an annual financial burden exceeding $400 billion on society, a figure that has increased fourfold every 10 years since 1970. Each year, North America is losing around 1.5 million acres of native vegetation due to invasive species. And the spread of invasive plants can be likened to a gradual explosion. These species pose significant risk to ecosystem stability and biodiversity. And these are quotes I took from Paula Wynham, who wrote a book called The Bad Naturalist. Has anybody read that yet? She bought 200 acres in Northern Virginia on a mountaintop that was full of invasives, and she wrote a book about it. And so I borrowed those specific terms from her, but she's dead on. But she's tackled her property, or she's tackling it. It's never finished. I took this picture on Friday. What's this? Kudzu, the vine that ate the South, right? Kudzu was introduced in the late 1800s at the Philadelphia Flower Show is a fast-growing ornamental ground cover. What, same as Japanese knotweed or just as bad? Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, Japanese knotweed, hugely invasive, very aggressive. I'm dealing with it on my own property. Thanks for the reminder. But yeah, this is kind of in my neighborhood, next to the grocery store I go to. But this is a real life example of like, oh my gosh, this is in a nice suburban northern part of Atlanta on a lot. It's so opportunistic that look what it does. And you can, these are little vines coming out here. This plant just wants to grow and take over everything, and it will, and it'll kill everything it's over. So this depicts what I'm talking about when you find a plant that creates a impossible opportunity for native plants to either establish or survive. So it's climbing over everything it's climbing over, it's killing everything it's on, and it keeps taking over, and it's almost impossible to kill it back. So one example, very, not near and dear to my heart, but definitely near. Okay, number 8, reduce your lawn. I'm not saying eliminate it. I could, but I'm just trying to give some grace here. Reduce it, consider reducing it. Doug Tallamy said if we could reduce half of our lawn space, just half of it around the country, that would add up to more land than is owned by some number of major national parks. I think it's 10 or even more national parks. But some things we could do. That's when I bought my place, that's all the grass I put in. And that was just seeded in, and those were my early beds before I planted into them. And now that little strip of green is half that size and mostly thinned out because the canopy of the trees has taken over and grass doesn't grow well in shade. And I'm not trying to promote it because I know that's a losing battle, but there's nothing wrong with a beautiful, nice strip of grass running through as a connecting point or to calm the eyes. But you know, make room for beds and consider your native plants and your other things. It would be much more beneficial as an ecological service to a lot of wildlife than the monoculture of just grass. It's pretty, it has purposes, but in moderation. Or you can allow, you can put wildflower seeds in your lawn and just cut a path through it, like this place in a garden in England. It's beautiful, I love this. And it's very inviting, and it offers a lot of ecological value. And in this picture, it's not even grass, but it looks like a lawn. Now, it's still a monoculture, and it doesn't have a lot of ecological value, but it's an alternative to just turf grass. Anybody, I'm not expecting anybody to know, but you want to guess at what that is? It's a liriope, it's mondo grass. It's a dwarf liriope, basically. And this is a husband and wife plugged this yard with little plugs, little tiny seedlings, 4 inches on center, and in about 2 years it completely filled in. They never water it, they never fertilize it, they mow it once a year just to cut off the dead tops, just the brown tops. But pretty hands-off once it establishes. That's the key. What? Oh, yeah. It's really easy to walk on. Doesn't make you trip or fall over. So it's pretty good. The further north you get, the less possible it is to thrive. I don't know how far north is too far, but it does prefer warmer than colder. Oh, you can. Okay, voice of experience. Thank you. All right, and just a foodscape. Consider putting edible ornamentals that will fool everybody from not knowing they're edible too, because some HOAs and neighbors have issues with vegetables growing in front yards, but when they look like kale and collards and broccoli and chard and all those beautiful vegetables that you can eat and look good, that's not a bad thing. And then biodiversity does not exist in a monoculture. So we're talking about ecological gardening. We're talking about habitats and promoting a system beyond just our garden. And that's biodiversity, healthy ecosystems. But we got to bring diversity into the picture to create biodiversity, because certain insects that rely on pollen and nectar have unique mouth parts, and they can only maybe source pollen and nectar from certain types of flowers. Maybe it's umbrals, which are kind of the flat tops, or maybe it's the hummingbirds that need tubular flower access. So the diversity really makes it more inviting, and when you plant those things, you will see a big difference. You'll see the activity come in, and you'll see your garden literally come alive. Last thing here, and we're done, except for that story, and then Q&A. And that is gardeners and, people that like and appreciate nature, doesn't just stop on our yards and the ground under our feet that we're maintaining. We have to think about recycling and composting. So in a throwaway society, I ask you, what percentage of that landfill do you think could be avoided and doesn't even need to be there? 50? Higher. 70 is about right. 65 to 70%. Because 40% of it can be recycled and 25% is food or paper. And to think that 25% or more can go into our compost pile to create the best soil that you can possibly create to make any garden better, like I already told you, why wouldn't you do that? And even if you have an aversion to the concern of critters or other creepy crawlers going through compost, there are systems that will be able to exclude them from coming in. They're called closed bin systems. But to the extent we can buy less, repurpose, reuse, compost, recycle, we can cut down on the size of this significantly and reduce a lot of the methane gas going up into the atmosphere, which is a contributor to the climate change, which is one of the reasons we're talking about the sense of urgency for ecological gardening. Okay, I'm not gonna ask you to ask me any questions yet because we're gonna have a dedicated time for that in just a minute. But I'll wrap up with a 2-minute story about compost. And I've talked briefly about why I love compost so much and why you should love it just as much because it does so much for your garden. But I'm always thinking about ways to inspire people to do it, to make compost, and to give them a real word association or something they can relate to. So one day I was given a talk to a room about the size, and I had an idea and I was gonna experiment with this. So what I did was I rounded up 4 glass jars and 4 worms, and I brought them with me to my talk, and I had a podium that had a wooden podium, and I told everybody, I said, look, I wanna really show you the power of compost and why it's important. And I'm gonna demonstrate this with these 4 worms and these 4 jars, and in each of the jars I put something different. And I said, in this first jar, I'm gonna put alcohol, like drinking alcohol, like gin or whatever it was. And I'm gonna put a worm in there. So I did that, and I set it behind the podium. And then in number 2, I managed to find somebody that was smoking, and I got their cigarette smoke into the jar and closed it up with a worm in it and put that under the podium. And in the third one, I thought I'd be wild and try something crazy, so I used liquid chocolate and put a worm in that. And so those are the 3 kind of the not things you would typically think to put wildlife in. But anyway, I did. And then the 4th one was my compost, my really great compost that makes everything thrive. And I put a worm in that one, closed it up, put it under the podium, and I gave my talk. And it was all about soil building and compost. And I thought I had nailed it, with getting people on board and really understanding the essence of what I was trying to communicate through the power of good compost. So at the end of my talk, I said, okay, so you've heard about all of the benefits of compost and why it's so important. Let's see what the impact that has on wildlife and earthworms in this case, versus what healthy compost has for worms. So the first jar I pulled out, and it's the alcohol, and the worm is intoxicatedly dead. So sad, but true. Second one was the cigarette smoke. That worm was dead. The third one was the liquid chocolate. The worm was dead, but I think I saw a smile on its face, so I didn't feel as guilty about that one. And then the 4th one was my compost. And I knew when I pulled that out, I was gonna have that worm partying. And in fact, not only was it had a whole family. In the hour that I talked, I had baby worms in there, and things were going nuts. So I featured that. I said, look at all the activity in this versus that, and why it's so important to have good inputs versus the risk of bad inputs. So what does this tell you about the benefits of healthy compost? Thinking that's a slam dunk question. And a lady in the back of the room, like way back, stood up before I had a chance to call on anybody. She kind of dominated because she stood up in the back. She said, I know. I said, okay, ma'am, what is the benefits of good compost on this? And she said, well, I don't know about that, but I do know from what you've just showed me, as long as you drink, smoke, and eat chocolate, you won't have worms. What do you even say to that? And she was right. So I left it at that and said, right. Yeah. Okay, so let's do some Q&A, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Joe.
You're welcome.
We have time for just a few questions, and I'm going to ask that if you have a question to come here to the microphone so that everyone can hear your question and we can hear it for posterity in the recording that we're doing.
So polite. You sure you're from New York?
So there's a dry slope, it's a flower bed that's sloped onto a street that can flood.
What would you say, the last few words?
That floods.
That flex?
The street floods.
Okay, floods.
It's a flood
Got it.
zone.
Yes.
What would you put, what type of mulch or instead of mulch would you use?
Is it first of all, is it possible to change the, to grade it to what's the word I'm trying to say? Terrace it, thank you.
No.
No, okay. What type of mulch would I use? Something heavy, like hardwood mulch, coarse hardwood mulch, rather than pine bark. Pine bark's light, so I would avoid a light type of mulch. And pine typically is your lighter type of mulch. Hardwood is your heaviest. And if you're okay with inconsistent size mulch, arborist wood chips would be a perfect option for that. Because, again, but even when they're shredding the heart of the trunk, it's not just the bark. So even pine in that case would be okay because you're getting a lot of the hardwood in the pine. So hardwood trees, shredded, bulky, is heavier, it tends to weigh down more, and it's not likely to float away.
So arborist, pine, or hardwood?
Hardwood. Your preference is hardwood. So if you're requesting it online, like there's a service called chipdrop.com. Do you have access to that up here? Arborists will donate their mulch to you if you go online and request it. And you can specify what you're looking for.
What is that, chip?
Chipdrop, one word, chipdrop.com. And they may or may not have a service in your area, but they're moving across the country pretty well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I actually had two questions. I was wondering when you were talking about the ground cover for mulch or live mulch, when we have clover kind of jump from, because we ended up doing our lawn as clover and we just have like natural plants that grow as well and then we mow it. But when they jump into our planting beds, we tend to try to pull them out because we don't want it to take the nutrition away from the plants.
Yeah.
Planting, but is there something different that you're suggesting as using as live mulch?
Any ground cover classifies as live mulch because it's covering the ground and it's living. So it can be terrible stuff. You know, I mean, technically it could be, I'm not promoting ivy, but it could be ivy. But I mean,
But that would take from the nutrients of the plants, right?
Ivy is just aggressive. Ivy necessarily wouldn't pull nutrients. I mean, it's competing. It needs the water and nutrients that your other plants do too. But what you've got is great because of it's fixing nitrogen in the soil too. But did I answer your question, or was there a part of that you were?
No, that's okay. So if we let the clover grow into our garden too, that's actually
if you're okay with it. If you're
Okay.
okay with it. But there are other nitrogen sources, organic nitrogen sources that you could use. So if that were becoming, burdensome for you, it's okay to take it out because you could just use organic derivatives of nitrogen
Okay.
to replace it.
All right, and then my other question was, we have, I don't know what these kind of beetles are, but they attack our lilies, and we've found we can use neem oil, but is that natural? Is that okay to use?
Neem is natural, and
Okay.
usually it's more of a repellent than a insecticide where it's going to kill, which is good about neem from the neem tree, and most of the time it repels rather than kills, but it is non-selective. So, I mean, it does kill some insects, and some of those can be beneficial. So it's something to be aware of.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you. First of all, thanks for your wonderful presentation and
You're
your
welcome.
fabulous pictures.
Thank you.
I have one comment and one question. The first question is, I had about 3 large trees taken down and the stumps made into very uneven wood chips. And when I went to start putting them around my house and my gardener mentioned do not put them up against the house because of termites. Is that an issue around garden beds as well, or we don't really have to worry about that?
It's a concern that isn't as warranted as it tends to be made. Is the side of your house, what is it? What is the material?
The base is concrete or whatever the
Right.
foundation is.
Yeah, so less of a concern than ever because of that. You know, if you want to be super conservative, don't do that. But I do add arborist wood chips right up to the base of my house that has a concrete foundation. And I've never, so far, knock on wood, had an issue with that. But
I did it up to about a foot from the house, so.
that's great. And what'd you do with the gap? Just leave it, or did you add something else?
just left it.
That's fine too, because the only thing that's happening there is that, you know, sunlight's getting to the soil, so you may see some more weeds pop up. But that's worst case scenario.
And then the second part is more of I guess, a comment than a question. With respect to the leaves and leaving them, we have a big issue in this area called tick-borne diseases like Lyme disease.
Oh, yeah.
So that's always a huge concern.
Right.
So just,
Yeah, no, good point. And you have to address those concerns for sure.
Hi. I have a question about complementary plants, kind of like integrated pest management using plants.
Yeah.
Like, I always thought marigolds were good to put around your, like, tomatoes, or can you address things like plants that you can do that help repel other pests?
Yes, and that's a huge subject. And so what she's talking about is called companion planting. And the idea of companion planting is to put a type of plant around your, let's call it your target plant, the plant, your cash crop, whatever it is, the plant you're trying to protect. And you put a companion plant next to it to either attract, repel, or confuse pest. It does one of those 3 things. And there's a lot of anecdotal companion plant combinations that don't have any science backing behind it as to why it works. And there are some that have science backing. And so to answer your question, I would just refer you to a book called Science-Based Companion Planting by Jessica Walliser. Because there are a lot of combinations, like the marigold. The French marigolds actually put out a substance through their roots that repels nematodes in the soil. So it has a specific benefit. But there are many other beneficial relationships of other plants with your target plant. And rather than try to think on the fly on some good combinations, I could give you a few, but I would rather you really look for this book because it's so good with helping you understand their role in being beneficial. Companion planting, Science-Based Companion Planting, Jessica Walliser. Does that help?
Great. Thank you again for this great discussion. I'm a roving reporter from WPKN in the Organic Farm Stand show.
Wow.
Wanted to know if you know of any towns or regions that have ordinances or rules, zoning regulations, to help people start reducing the amount of lawn or giving incentives, tax incentives, for instance, because you have mentioned it, and I'm so happy you did. Reducing lawn and allowing for vegetable gardens in the front lawn. If you know of any cities or towns where you know that this has become a thing. Thank you.
That is a great question. Thank you for asking it. So I'll answer the question this way, and I don't know any towns that are incentivizing lawn reduction, but I know many fights, and I've covered them in my podcast aggressively, on homeowners who are trying to naturalize their yards more than the traditional lawn by adding native plants to part of it and fighting HOAs and homeowners and municipalities who say that, you know, your neighbor's complaining and it's not within our bylaws to allow that, and they've had to fight it, and some have gone to great expense of over $60,000 or so. Janet Crouch in Virginia, I think. Anyway, I have some very extensive podcasts on this topic from a slightly different angle, and that is the homeowners trying to fight for their rights to be allowed in their own property to grow more native plants by giving up some lawn. And they've been getting pushback by the neighbors and the HOAs or the municipality. And so my website is joegardner.com. And if you put HOA into the search field, it would bring up multiple podcasts of really good stories. One was covered in the New York Times, and that's the one Janet Crouch that I referred to, who spent $60,000 and they won. And it led to the entire state providing new laws that didn't penalize people for, you know, trying to do this. So it's a different approach into that issue that you're dealing with, but from that direction. Good luck. Keep me posted if you think about it and you learn. I would love to cover that too. And we wouldn't be competing.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you all for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to Sustainable Westport and all the partners for this evening. I will say, but don't everybody jump up. I have a lot to say. Joe's book will be for sale right over here, and he will be signing for you. So if you have any questions about your vegetable gardens, we can get that answered right here. And as a special bonus, this year, if you read this book, it also counts towards your summer reading challenge. There are bookmarks over here as well. And I know that Sustainable Westport had one more thing to say.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And we're just going to leave you with a little inspiration. I know a lot of you are coming from other towns, but we'd like to invite you to think about what kind of town you'd like to live in.
I want to live in a town that looks like this forever.
I want to live in a town that protects the natural environment.
I want to live in a town that has plenty of green space for everyone.
I want to live in a town that embraces renewable energy.
I want to live in a town that promotes composting.
I want to live in a town where pollinators are more important than perfect lawns.
I want to live in a town where all the school children are taught to garden and love the soil.
I want to live in a town where we teach our children how to live sustainably.
I want to live in a town where I could ride my bike to school.
I want to live in a town that's committed to eliminating single-use plastics.
I want to live in a town that honors its commitment to being a net zero energy community by 2050.
I want to live in a town where the whole community is involved.
I want to live in a town that is known for supporting farmers.
I want to live in a town that embraces inclusivity and sustainability for all.
I want to live in a town that cares as much about trees as it does about parking lots.
I want to live in a town that in the years to come is as beautiful for my children as it is right now.
I want to live in a town where animals want to live.
I want to live in a town that cares about its future.
I want to live in a town that simply cares.
Sustainable Westport wants to live in a town where everyone cares, feels empowered, and takes action.
Join us to help create the kind of town you want to live in.